Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Wednesday, March the 3rd, 2021. I want to begin today by talking about drugs, pharmaceutical drugs, particularly those that change, modify behavior. I believe I've expressed on this live stream previously my unified field theory of our cultural, civilizational, if you will, decadence, which is drug use. That a great many of our leadership class and the aspirational class are on drugs. They are on antidepressant drugs, SSRIs, and others. They are on benzos. They are on antipsychotic drugs, as well as marijuana in its various forms, which makes it difficult for them to think straight or to utilize their cognitive capacity. There's a fascinating piece on the Substack of Freddie DeBoer on his own personal experiences. It's called The Weight, The Drugs and My Body. He begins, as I write this, I've been on a cocktail of psychiatric medications for some 42 months. It has always been difficult, though my tolerance for the pills ebbs and flows. I know that in documenting the effects of these drugs, I will be assumed to be speaking out of self-pity. But there are many who are like me, and there is also the great big bulk of people who do not understand. In August 2017, a long gestating manic phase of my bipolar disorder bloomed into a delusional state. My paranoia and grandiosity reached full flower, and I saw a world of enemies intent on destroying me, threatened by my importance, my power. I said and did unforgivable things for which I was and am responsible. I made a terrible false accusation against an innocent person who I had suddenly decided was a mortal enemy. I behaved bizarrely at work. I stalked and harassed people digitally. I lost many friends and was justifiably exiled online. Eventually, I threatened someone with physical harm in a voicemail, demonstrating my criminal genius. They told me that if I went to the hospital right away, they might still call the cops, but they would definitely call the cops if I did not. My brother got on the next train to come rescue me, and we went to the hospital. Again, this is the testament of Freddie DeBoer. When my dust settled, my life was wreckage. I had to confront the worst kinds of accusations, those you cannot answer because they are true. I was left to try to save whatever was left to save in my life. And so after several bureaucratic misadventures securing a long-term doctor, I finally found a caring and accomplished psychiatrist, the father of a friend. In my intake appointment, I laid it out for him that I had suffered from punishing depression starting in my mid-teens, that when I was 20, I had a psychotic episode and ended up in the hospital, that I'd fallen off of meds within 3 months of starting, and that I'd spent the prior 15 years on and off medication, but mostly off. We got to work on figuring things out, and I got to work taking meds by choice and with true intention for the first time. For the things I had done, I was left with my shame. I became, in other words, just another patient, one of millions upon millions of people in this country in treatment for psychiatric conditions. Conventional estimates suggest that fully a fifth of American adults will seek treatment for a psychiatric condition in any given year. The Centers for Disease Control says that some 13% of American adults took an antidepressant between 2015 and 2018. Pharmacy benefits management giant Express Scripts that 4.9% took an anti-anxiety medication in 2019. The National Institutes for Health that 1.6% took an antipsychotic from 2013 to 2018. I wonder how high these numbers have risen during the COVID panic and hysteria. DeBoer continues, the number of people who live every day with these medications and their side effects is considerable. Those at least are lucky enough to have a prescribing doctor. 60% of U.S. counties do not have a single practicing psychiatrist. 3.5 years on, I'm still working the program and still living with the consequences. The side effects have always been the largest part of my consistent failure to stay on meds, alongside my persistent self-delusion that I'm strong enough to manage my condition myself. I never intend to stop meds when I stop taking them. I just get up one morning and I'm suffering under the influence of some of the side effects, and I just don't take them. I'll take them tomorrow, I think, and then I look up and it's been a month. Despite my recent success in staying on meds, it is still the side effects that gnaw at me every day. It is not an exaggeration to say that they are a constant aspect of my mental life. I think about the side effects I live with every hour of every day. They're there when I wake up in the morning, and they're there when I go to bed at night. In this, I know I am joined by millions, Freddie DeBoer writes, and I also know that most people simply have no idea. I think the average person knows in some vague way that people with mental illness struggle under the weight of their medications, but I think the extent and depth of these problems are largely unknown. This broad cultural ignorance challenges me constantly. I have to stop myself from talking about it to strangers on the subway, and so I'm going to talk about my medications and the things they do, in hopes that some might learn a little bit about what it's like for the benefit of those millions who suffer. I'll break in to say that these medications of which he speaks are relatively recent in human history. So I suppose the question would be, what did people do before these medications? Also, the institution of psychiatry is relatively recent in human history as well. And when I come across testaments like this, I often I ask some questions, or I consider some questions. Was this person introduced to psychiatry, or to a psychologist, or to a therapist at an early age? Was this person using marijuana at an early age? I think these are relevant. It's been my experience that I have known few adults who were introduced to the talking cure at a formative age who turned out to be normal adults, but others might have different experiences. He talks about his depression, and I don't know if he's ever used marijuana or was once a constant user of it, but it has been my impression through observation and through reading that marijuana is poison to people with depressive personalities. Of course, this brings up another question about depression. Depression is usually correlated to a cause or to a number of causes. It seems to me to be pointless to speak of depression without consideration of the causes which could have led to it. If someone has suffered a reversal in his or her life, if someone is desperately unhappy for various personal reasons, professional reasons, familial reasons, whatever, this is all tremendously relevant. We speak of depression now as if it's some sort of miasma, that it rises from a swamp, and one day we breathe it in and then we're afflicted with it. Well, that's simply not true. But to return to DeBoer, we might start with the weight gain, as it is impossible to pin on one drug and the most obvious side effect. Weight gain is one of the most widespread and consistent side effects of all manner of psychiatric medications, and for many, one of the major reasons to fear going on them. For me personally, it's always been a barrier. I was a gym rat in my prior life. Certainly, the weight gain cannot help but be apparent to people who knew me before I started on meds and see me now. The day I went to the hospital, I weighed 177 pounds. 3 months of meds later, I weighed 235. 177 was not a healthy weight for me either at 6'1". When I am manic, I work out like a demon and I don't eat. But still, in those first few months, my body expanded so quickly I could hardly believe it. The conventional advice for managing this side effect, diet and exercise, always felt pitiful in comparison to the power of the pills. Through a long process of trial and error, I've gotten down to a fairly consistent 220 pounds. But when I slip, the progress seems to be erased in a matter of days. Without constant vigilance, the weight gain is relentless, unyielding. Due to signs that I've developed pre-diabetes, I now take the drug metformin, which helps regulate my blood sugar. I'll mention that it is a recurring complaint of people who are on antidepressant, antipsychotic drugs, that it feels as if their brains have been replaced with cotton wool. And one of the things that such people do is eat, and eat a great deal to fill the void. DeBoer continues, I know that to some, fixating on weight gain will seem like an exercise in vanity, and yes, I miss the aesthetics of my old body. I miss feeling attractive, but the problem is deeper, more unsettling. My physical self has changed, and I do not recognize it anymore. These pills violate the sovereignty of your body. They make the basic functions of your anatomy something uncontrollable and unknowable. Huffing and puffing up the stairs and straining against the waistbands of my pants are not insurmountable challenges. But the knowledge that my body has, in a very basic sense, betrayed me is a deeper wound. Other side effects are drug dependent. For me, lithium is the basis of everything. It is the foundation of my treatment. A mood stabilizer, it is one of the most reliable and widely prescribed psychiatric medications in the world. The pills flatten you out, trimming off the emotional highs and lows that can, for many, cause so much wreckage in their lives. An element of the periodic table, lithium cannot be patented and is thus available fairly cheaply at almost any pharmacy. The emotion moderating effects are apparent after 3 to 4 weeks, and those benefits make it easier to stay on the pill. Not only is the clinical evidence of its efficacy in patients clear, multiple studies have found that places with higher natural levels of lithium in the drinking water have lower rates of violent crime and suicide. This came as little surprise to me. When you have experienced bipolar mania, the shaking, delirious, heart-racing, paranoid acceleration of everything you are, lithium's steady and reliable presence is as comforting as a drug can get. But lithium has its price. DeBoer testifies it is prime culprit in the weight gain, and many struggle to remain on the drug for that reason alone. My hands shake, sometimes to the point where I can't lift a coffee cup to my mouth thanks to the lithium. I pee more often than a pregnant woman, maybe 10 to 12 times in a day, and it causes gastrointestinal distress, which is sometimes severe. This can result in nausea and pain, though thankfully this fades from me after several weeks of use. But there are other elements of this gastrointestinal distress, one which I will not share for you for the sake of propriety. The end result is that I constantly worry about having immediate access to a toilet. Trips to Manhattan, notoriously short on public bathrooms, are exercises in nerves, and I've made several dicey subway trips home to Brooklyn. The drug also comes packaged with larger dangers. Lithium has what doctors refer to as a narrow therapeutic band, which is to say that the drug is healing within a narrow range of blood levels, ineffective below it, and potentially very dangerous above. Long-term lithium use has also been linked to physical problems such as kidney issues, though not without controversy. And there is, of course, the basic function of lithium itself. It flattens mood effectively and flattens them indiscriminately. I've always been sensitive to the perception that someone being medicated for bipolar disorder must be emotionless, but well, I mostly am. It will occasionally strike me that I should feel something in response to some turn of events. I notice the absence of emotion, the way it dawns on you that you forgot to turn your music back on after answering a phone call. You fill the space where organic feelings should be with your memories of what they feel like. Emotions become thought rather than felt, understood rather than embodied. What haunts you is knowing that you don't really know what you're missing. DeBoer writes, I take a couple of antidepressants. Prozac, the most famous antidepressant, is a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, or SSRI. These are some of the most studied psychiatric drugs and some of the most controversial, as persistent and legitimate questions endure about whether they really do something. Yes, I've written about this in the past, and studies have shown that SSRIs have been proved to be no more efficacious than a placebo or St. John's wort. They are also, of course, correlated to what is called suicidal ideation. DeBoer continues, Prozac too can cause weight gain. There are sexual side effects that sometimes, only sometimes, suppress my desire to have sex, and that sometimes, only sometimes, prevent me from finishing when I do. I have vivid and bizarre dreams, and the literature tells me that may be the Prozac, but who can say? My other antidepressant, Wellbutrin, seems to have blessedly few side effects for me, although then again, I'm never sure if I'm doing anything beyond giving me a slight kick in the morning. For others, it can cause sleeplessness and headaches. It is the antipsychotic side effects seem even crueler, DeBoer writes. Because the side effects of antipsychotics are truly discouraging, they are both broad and deep, many in number, and frequently debilitating in impact. There are two generations of antipsychotics, sometimes known as typical, first generation, and atypical, second generation. The former includes drugs like the famous schizophrenia treatment Thorazine, while the latter includes drugs like Risperdal and Abilify. The typical antipsychotics have somewhat milder forms of some of the side effects, but their unintended effects remain profoundly challenging. Like many other psychiatric drugs, they cause significant weight gain. The drug I take, Zyprexa, is notorious for causing intense hunger pangs. But a month into my treatment, I found myself so voraciously hungry at all times that I scoured the internet for the experience of others, simply to see if what I was experiencing could be real. When I found a site with many personal testimonies of users suffering from similar experiences, I felt validated in a deep and odd way. Zyprexa is unusual in the depth of its hunger and weight issues, but they mostly all cause people to become fat. There is a second-generation antipsychotic that is not associated with weight gain, Latuda, but is mainly for the treatment of bipolar depression rather than bipolar mania. And anyway, it is still on patent. I could never afford it, even with health insurance. Antipsychotics make you drowsy. Antipsychotics can make you dizzy. Some can cause debilitating gastrointestinal effects. Some who take them suffer from dangerous fluctuations in their blood pressure. DeBoer continues, it is the cognitive side effects of antipsychotics that have come closest to breaking me and forcing me off meds. Frequently, these cognitive effects are defined as lack of focus and impediments to short-term memory. This definition is not wrong exactly. Certainly, I've suffered from those. On these drugs, my attention drifts like a floater in my eye. Paying consistent attention to one thing feels like trying to line up a crosshairs with a target that keeps skittering around in front of you. I've several times been in a meeting and repeated to myself, I'm paying attention, will suddenly realize that I've been staring off into the distance while the subject of the meeting went whistling past me. I just lose time. It's the oddest feeling, like a momentary bit of time travel. I honestly can't remember when my attention slipped. DeBoer continues, the memory loss feels less mysterious. It's just that something that was in my head is suddenly totally gone. It's an encounter with a complete void. When I forget something now, I almost never have it on the tip of my mind the way you often do. There's just a blank space that resists any attempt to investigate it. I know that. Even unmedicated, if I'm on the subway and I think of a song I want to listen to when I get home, there's a good chance I won't remember. The difference now is that this forgetting is universal and happens before I reach the next station. I am forever trying to remember if there was something I was trying to remember. I've gotten used to clicking on my web browser to open a new tab and forgetting where I wanted to go before I navigate there. DeBoer continues, unfortunately, there are two major side effects. These two major side effects are both problems that tend to be defined as personality defects, as a lack of character. Paying attention and remembering are things we are supposed to be able to make ourselves do if we care enough. I can tell you from personal experience that in a professional setting, an inability to stay focused in a meeting or to remember what you've just been told are looked on very poorly. In this association of attention with respect and engagement with virtue, I feel solidarity with those with ADHD. Ideally, we live in a society where the Americans with Disability Act compelled employers to extend to us the reasonable accommodation required by the law, to be forgiving of these lapses because they are legally required to be, but in practice, these rights are far from guaranteed. Again, I speak from experience. I don't know what to make of that last paragraph, actually. If someone is on drugs that make it impossible for him to do his work properly, the government is supposed to protect employers from dealing with this problem. DeBoer continues, but there's an aspect that goes beyond memory and focus, one that's harder to explain, but is omnipresent and at times debilitating. And he describes an episode of Law and Order, a character suffering from schizophrenia, talking about antipsychotics. Quote, I'm using every ounce of energy I have just to talk to you. I feel like I'm pawing through a wool blanket. There's that wool metaphor again. I feel stiff and half a step behind everyone. It takes so much effort. I get so damn tired just holding on to reality, unquote. DeBoer continues, it is in that sense that cognitive processes can be effortful. In the same way that physical exertion can be effortful, it frequently leaves me contemplating pouring my pills down the sink. The phenomenon is very hard to put into words. Think of the way your muscles slowly grow tired as you complete some repetitive and strenuous task. The gradual slowdown, the way your limbs turn sluggish no matter how you command them to move, is how it feels to think sometimes. I used to love a good conversation. I used to do well in interviews. I used to pride myself on my lecturing skills when teaching. Now I stutter constantly, struggle to follow what's being said, stumble forward like my shoelaces are tied together, constantly fearing humiliating myself as I push through the fog. I don't have anything artful or poignant to say about it. I just hate what my mind has become. And people taking antipsychotics have to worry about the idiosyncrasies and potential interaction effects of the particular drugs they take. Though similar in function and strength, all of the typical antipsychotics have their own quirks, their own way of interacting with the brain and mind, which means that patients in the early stages of finding the right prescription may end up on one that is a particularly bad match with their psychology, provoking debilitating cognitive issues. I'll never take Seroquel again. And then he talks about facial tics, tardive dyskinesia. Yes, the side effects of antipsychotics are sometimes treated with ancillary medications. I have a prescription for benzodiazepines to deal with the chronic restlessness and one for amphetamines to address the extreme inability to focus. Thankfully, I only need to take the Xanax rarely, not more than 2 or 3 times a day. Others need to take benzodiazepines almost daily to deal with the inability to sit down, stop their legs from shaking, and be at peace. He says that benzos, such as Xanax, Valium, and Ativan, are notoriously addicting, but I've been very careful and have the help of a doctor is vigilant about use. The only real side effect of the amphetamines is feeling hot and jittery. Finally, I have a prescription for trazodone, which is used on label as an antidepressant, but which I have handy as a sleeping pill. As you might expect from medications with such profound downsides, the resistance against them is fierce. Since I had a public psychiatric crisis, DeBoer writes, and since I've been public about being medicated, I've heard several times from people in the anti-psychiatry movement. This is a loose constellation of citizen activists and renegade doctors who reject the biological interpretation of psychiatric disease and who are virulently opposed to psychiatric medicine, which they generally see as useless poisons. I've received perhaps a half dozen emails from them in the last 3+ years. Sometimes they are sympathetic, sometimes they're contemptuous, but they're all convinced that my medication regimen is a self-inflicted curse. And he talks about these skeptics and concludes, I do not spend my time dreaming of better drugs. I dream of the days when I will not take any. People often age out of bipolar disorder, though it may be another 20 years before I can live without medication. In the shorter term, my doctor and I look for places where we can reduce my dosages, pay attention to what my body is telling me, and try to minimize harm. Like most people with mental illness, DeBoer writes, I'm left to trudge on with deeply imperfect medicines, ones that seem to present an impossible choice between stability in my life and the quality of my life. The best thing for those of us that take them is to be understood, for others to know what treatment has cost us and what is costing us still. Mental illness is, as Thomas Szasz pointed out, a metaphor. It can be a useful metaphor, but where are the causes for this disease? In almost every case, the symptoms are the disease. There's no asymptomatic mental illness. Joseph Conrad said that life is not a problem to be solved, but a purpose to be fulfilled. But we don't believe that anymore. We believe that life is a problem to be solved, and we do that with drugs. So let's start with one drug. Causes side effects. Let's have another drug, and another, and another, and another, and another. I don't know how many drugs DeBoer has. I didn't count. I suppose we're looking at 10 or 12. But the side effect of this, or the end result of this drug regimen, is clearly to make him fat, sweaty, jittery, and unable to pay close attention to things for reasonable lengths of time. It sounds to me to be a fate worse than death. But clearly, there are millions of Americans who live such lives. And I really think that we have to ask ourselves the question how this has come about and what can be done about it. Because all indications are the number of Americans and others in the Western world who are going to be living on regimens such as DeBoer's is only going to increase. And this is a truly terrible thing. Are there no other possible approaches to misbehavior that can't be tried? Because that seems to be, that's the decision of the psychiatric community, and this is what is now become common opinion. If you watch television, you will routinely see advertisements for antidepressants. And if you are taking this, that, or the other antidepressant, or maybe two, well, we have another one that you can take to balance out the contraindications of the previous ones. This seems to me to be exactly the wrong way to get around this. What do people in the chat think? Hello to Dan, Picasso88, British American. Jogakin666 says, don't smoke pills, kids. Steve says, ask me about my mental illness. Well, obviously, DeBoer has exceedingly serious problems. But in one of Adam Curtis's documentaries, he notes that, I guess it was in the 1940s, that psychiatrists first began considering the question of what are the possible causes for the symptoms demonstrated by our patients. Thomas Oz writes that he came to America from Hungary in the 1940s or the late 1930s, and he worked in a state mental hospital, and they just whacked people with Thorazine. If people gave any indication of being troublesome, nope, here's some more Thorazine for you so you can go back to your vegetative state. But so as a result of psychiatrists considering the possibility that perhaps people had genuine problems which were causing their maladaptive symptoms, they came up with these checklists. And to their astonishment, they found out that the checklists leaked out into the general public and that people started diagnosing themselves with mental illness. I recall Jimmy Carter's wife, whose name escapes me, said as long ago as the 1970s that about half of Americans suffer from some form of mental illness. Well, if that is the case, then mental illness is normative. And I have noticed with millennials that it is a badge of honor for them to conclude that they suffer from all manner of psychiatric conditions. ADHD and bipolar and all sorts of things. Oh, and they diagnose themselves as autistic, as if the belief is that one is not an authentic person without suffering from some form of mental illness. Of course, if you redefine mental illness as a problem with living, then I suppose that is true. Hickman Warrior says, I live in upper middle class area full of horrible dried out prune people, mostly WASP libtards. And adds, American society is depressogenic. There is something to that, I believe. I really do. That the way that we live now is driving us insane. Turbo capitalism, that is a coinage of Edward Luttwak, destroys all social bonds and offers you the fix at a price, says Hickman Warrior. Matt Beck says, read the book Toxic Psychiatry by Dr. Peter Breggin. It really helped me get over my involuntary brushes with the psychiatric system. Okay, let's scroll down here and see if we have something from any else here. Adam Curtis has a new documentary out, says Picasso88. Well, I'll definitely have to check that out. Well, someone mentions alcohol. I mean, we talk about self-medication. Before psychiatric drugs, I suppose that was the psychiatric drug. It has its disadvantages, of course, but typically not the disadvantages described by Freddie DeBoer. Yes, Rosalind Carter. Normative is a bad word, says Coachulango. Yes, I know it is now. Now that we are actually, this word neurodivergent and neurodivergence, they are coming into the mainstream. Soon we will not talk about mental illness at all, and to use the word mental illness will be seen as hate speech because the proper word will be neurodivergent. Let's talk about Germany. Germany has a problem with democracy, according, well, to the German government and to the New York Times. And the problem with Germany's democracy is too many people are voting for the wrong party. This is from Katrin Benhold in the New York Times today. For the first time in its post-war history, Germany has placed its main opposition party under surveillance. One of the most dramatic steps yet by a Western democracy to protect itself from the onslaught of far-right forces that will upset politics from Europe to the United States. Yes, far-right forces. Thomas Saz says, in the animal kingdom, the rule is eat or be eaten. In the human kingdom, the rule is define or be defined. You see, far right, we define what we don't like as far right. Therefore, it's illegitimate, and therefore it must be suppressed. But back to Benhold. The decision by the Domestic Intelligence Agency will now allow it to tap phones and other communications and monitor the movements and members of the far-right Alternative for Germany party, which, horrors, not only sits in the federal parliament, but has become entrenched at all levels of politics in every part of the country. It is among the most sweeping efforts yet to deal with the rise of far-right and, wait for it, neo-Nazi political movements within Western democracy. Again, anyone who disagrees with us is a neo-Nazi. But these efforts are attempting more vigorously to constrain, ostracize, or even legally prosecute those elements to prevent them from chipping away at the foundations of democratic institutions. Oh, is the AfD arguing that if you vote us in, then we're going to close down democracy? Presumably, it's possible for the AfD to come to power in Germany and then to become unpopular and then to be voted out. No. But apparently the AfD cannot be allowed to take power. News of the move came on the same day that France banned a Generation Identity, a militant youth movement considered dangerous for its slick rebranding of neo-Nazi concepts. Can we have some evidence of this slick rebranding of neo-Nazi concepts? What are neo-Nazi concepts anyway? Could it be that having Germans replaced with fractious foreigners is not a good idea? I think that's probably a neo-Nazi concept. And as lawmakers in the European Parliament in Brussels forced the party of Hungary's semi-authoritarian leader, Viktor Orban, out of the mainstream conservative group. Yeah. Do they have 4,900 troops surrounding the capital in Hungary? Do they? I don't think so. Which is the more authoritarian country, Hungary or the United States of America? It also follows the impeachment hearing in Washington of former President Donald J. Trump over accusations that he incited the violent mob that stormed the Capitol on January 6th. No, actually, they opened the doors and let them in because it would have been near impossible, short of a howitzer, for them to enter the Capitol otherwise. As well as rising concerns among Democrats and even U.S. law enforcement agencies about links between some Republican Party members and extremist or conspiracy groups like QAnon. For Germany, the question of how to deal with the far right has particular urgency in an election year that will see Angela Merkel step down after 16 years as chancellor, a tenure in which she became a symbol of a Germany that has learned from its Nazi past and opened itself to refugees seeking shelter from conflict and persecution. You see, refugees good, opposition to refugees or migrants, let's say, bad. I'll point out that Angela Merkel was a significant young communist leader in the DDR, and that she received a PhD in the DDR, and it would have been impossible for her to receive such a degree without being a Stasi enforcer. Conveniently, her Stasi records have been lost. But it seems that the legacy of the Stasi was impossible to kill in Germany because of Germany's Nazi history. Oh, how old is Germany and how long was its Nazi history? I do not mean by any means to diminish the horrors and the crimes of 1933 to 1945. But World War II ended 76 years ago. Tell me, were the French, were they still paying the price for the monstrous crimes of Napoleon Bonaparte's regime and of the French Revolution 76 years after 1815? No, they were not. It was a time, when people were expected to move on from this. The fact that Hitler rose by democratic means before swiftly moving to abolish democracy by using a law, an enabling law that was passed by the Weimar Republic. Yeah, but that's not going to be mentioned. The country designed its post-war political structure with inbuilt safeguards to protect against the rise of political forces, particularly another Nazi party. There we go again. See, the AfD they're Nazis. And where's the evidence of this? The Domestic Intelligence Agency, known as the Federal Office for the Protection of the Constitution, is one of them. Its founding mission is to act as an early warning mechanism to protect the Constitution against budding threats. Thomas Haldenwang, the president of the agency, said, "We know from German history that far-right extremism didn't just destroy human lives, it destroyed democracy." That is exceedingly arguable. If democracy means, as it does literally, demos and kratos, the power of the people, then Hitler could be said to be extremely democratic. And Burnham argues this, of course, in The Machiavellians. The popular choice is not always the most just choice. Far-right extremism, he adds, and far-right terrorism. Oh, far-right terrorism. Is a lot of that going on in Germany? Are currently the biggest danger for democracy in Germany. The Alternative for Germany, known by its German acronym AfD, the first far-right party to make it into Germany's federal parliament since World War II, has become the most serious test for Germany's post-war institutions yet. The party won 13% of the vote in 2017, 2 years after Ms. Merkel welcomed over 1 million refugees into the country, or let's just call them migrants. During the pandemic, its support had shrunk to around 10%, but in Germany's former communist East, it still scores twice that. Despite noticeably radicalizing in recent years and closing ranks with neo-Nazis in street rallies, you have any pictures of that, New York Times? The AfD has pockets of support in state institutions like the police and the military, raising concerns about far-right infiltration at the heart of democracy. Well, one would expect that a party that has 10% support nationally and 20% in the former DDR is going to have pockets of support in state institutions like the police and the military. I personally might consider the Greens or the Link to be far left organizations, and they obviously have pockets of support in state institutions like the police and the military, but apparently that's not a problem. AfD lawmakers routinely travel to Russia, where they were hosted at length by the foreign minister. Where does Germany's natural gas come from? They celebrated President Trump's election. Oh, again, the inference here is that Trump is Hitler, and took photos with his ambassador during July the 4th celebrations and at the American embassy in Berlin. Oh, I see. So AfD lawmakers were associating with the American ambassador to Germany. How very shocking. More recently, several AfD members expressed sympathy for the storming of the U.S. Capitol on January the 6th. Quote, Trump is fighting the same political fight, you have to call it a culture war, as we in the AfD are in Germany in opposition, unquote, Martin Renner, an AfD lawmaker, wrote on Facebook. The post has since been deleted. Where's the context? Where's the nuance? Because apparently those are essential to say. When exactly did he say this? Did Renner say this? And in what context? Was he applauding the so-called storming of the Capitol? Because I think that if Renner had said this, that would be in the story. At home, AfD leaders accuse Muslim immigrants of being criminals, attack the press, and dismiss the Nazi era as a speck of bird poo in history. Yes, I'm familiar with this quotation. The point was, and it may have been overstated, that the Nazi regime was 12 years out of a German history of thousands. During the coronavirus pandemic, AfD officials have taken part in demonstrations that have at times turned violent, including last year when protesters tried to force their way into the Parliament building in an act that now seems like a harbinger of the violence that shook the Capitol in Washington in January. Oh, and there's a picture here. Right-wing protesters broke through the police barrier and tried to force their way into the Reichstag building in Berlin in August 20. And I'm seeing a bunch of protesters who are quite a distance away from the Reichstag building. The fact that there were AfD protesters there, and the fact that there were violent protesters there does not prove that the AfD was part of a violent attempt to storm the Reichstag. The New York Times continues that even as the AfD has become more radicalized, the party has established a presence in state and local legislatures across the country. Increasingly concerned about the party's positions, the Domestic Intelligence Agency has spent 2 years scrutinizing the speeches and social media posts of AfD officials for evidence of extremism. An assessment amounting to some 1,100 pages concluded that the party's position violated key principles of liberal democracy, not least Article 1 of the German Constitution, which states that human dignity is unassailable, whatever that might mean. Seriously? Human dignity is unassailable? Well, it seems to be assailed every day in many places all over the world. What they're saying is I suspect that objecting to migrants, to millions of migrants, that violates the Constitution. So here you have a situation where the German government decides to spy on, and clearly the German government has been spying on the AfD for years. Clearly they have informers within the AfD. And, so this is completely a disinterested study. We're going to summon up information which will allow us to ban, and that's clearly what they're aiming for, to ban a political opponent. Yes, and Alice Weidel, a prominent party leader, said the intelligence agency is acting purely politically when it comes to the AfD. Yes. Oh, I'll mention something that happened in Canada in the 1990s, where a group called the Heritage Front, shock, horror. Apparently neo-Nazism was coming to the fore. This was a professional organization that was making inroads. Well, it really wasn't much of a professional organization. It never had very many members, but it got a lot of press. And it turned out that the Heritage Front was being led and funded by the government of Canada. Yeah, as part of a plot to, guess what? To humiliate and isolate the Reform Party of Canada, which was a new political party which represented a threat to the progressive conservative government of Brian Mulroney. There's a phrase attributed to President John F. Kennedy: when peaceful protest becomes impossible, violent revolution becomes inevitable. But no, in Germany, they've perfected democracy by making sure that the people in power now, will always be in power, and that alternatives are not permitted. And as we will learn from Burnham, this is not a good thing. Let's go back to the chat. Please no German bashing. I don't believe I have been bashing the Germans. Roulette Crack says KMG has been the biggest influence in my post-pill life thus far. Him and Pulitzer Prize winner Leo Fong. Heckman Warrior says Green Party is full of freaks like the far left of the Democrat Party. Oh, our message is being... okay, I won't get into that. I'm for a rural party, says Quacholango. Jaco Raipala says, I was bashing Germans. Okay. Jaco Raipala says, Merkel is best proof that Morgenthau was right. Oh dear, I'm not going to repeat the second part of that. It's long been my hypothesis that Angela Merkel is attempting to erase Germany because she is deeply humiliated and offended at the death of her beloved DDR. Adam says the Great Replacement isn't happening, but also the Great Replacement is a good thing. One could say the same thing about a doublethink. Well, yes, in the same way that COVID-19, the Great Reset, isn't happening. Oh, but it is, and it's a good thing. If you're, say, from the World Economic Forum, or you're Joe Biden, or Justin Trudeau, or Boris Johnson, or Prince Charles, I could go on. Okay. Let's, Christian Democrats, ho, 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 ho. How about if the security services in Germany were to spy on, say, the Christian Democratic Party and the Christian Social Union in Bavaria, just to determine how much rank corruption there is in those parties? That would be pretty interesting, don't you think? And speaking of James Burnham, I am going to move on to beginning a discussion of Vilfredo Pareto, the great Italian sociologist. Burnham writes, Pareto, in his gigantic book Minded Society, disavows any purpose other than to describe and correlate social facts. He is not offering any program for social improvement, nor expressing any ideal of what society and government ought to be. He's trying merely to describe what society is like and to discover some of the general laws in terms of which society operates. What could or should be done with this knowledge once obtained is a question he does not try to answer. This restriction of the problem is more extreme than in the case of the other Machiavellians. They too, of course, try to describe and correlate social facts, and they never permit their goals or ideals or programs to distort their objective descriptions. They never, like Dante, mistake their wishes for reality. Nevertheless, they state also what kind of social order they feel to be desirable, and what the conditions are for the achievement of such a social order. In his earlier writings, particularly those on economic subjects, Pareto also expressed certain practical goals. He defended for some while the point of view of orthodox liberal economics. Not what is nowadays called liberalism, that strange melange of sentimental confusion, but the classical liberalism of free trade and free markets. This point of view he gradually abandoned. It was not replaced by any other. Critics have often argued that Pareto's disavowal of any practical goal is no more than pretense, and they have usually attributed to him this or that program. It may well be that, even though no goals are explicitly stated in Mind and Society, certain values and attitudes are suggested by the overall tone of his remarks. However, about these nothing can be definitively settled. They are in any case irrelevant to my purpose, which is to show what Pareto added to the main trends of Machiavellian thought. Everybody can argue all night about how to save society, but only a rare few have told us any truths about society. This is such a valuable insight, I'm going to repeat it. Everybody can argue all night about how to save society, but only a rare few have told us any truths about society. Burnham continues, to understand Pareto's general analysis of society, we must first be entirely clear about the distinction he makes between logical conduct and non-logical conduct. A man's conduct, that is human action, is logical under the following circumstances. When his action is motivated by a deliberately held goal or purpose, when that goal is possible, when the steps or means he takes to reach the goal are in fact appropriate for reaching it. Logical conduct is common in the arts, crafts, and sciences, and frequent in economic activity. Pareto calls the economic field interests. For example, a carpenter wants to make a table. The production of the table is his deliberately held purpose. This goal is normally quite possible. He assembles lumber and tools, applies one to the other, and as a result gets the table. The means he takes are in fact appropriate to reach his goal. Thus his conduct with respect to this activity is logical. Or a scientist wants to test the efficacy of a new drug in curing some disease, he devises proper experiments in accordance with the usual canons of scientific method and determines whether the drug does accomplish a cure. Or a worker wants higher wages and when the chance offers, quits one job for an available new one that does in fact pay more. Or an investor, wanting to maintain his funds in the most profitable manner, withdraws capital from a field of enterprise that is drying up in favor of a new and expanding industry. All of such activities are, in Pareto's sense, logical. If, however, any one or more of the conditions for logical conduct are not present, then the actions are non-logical. Actions may, for instance, have no deliberate motivation at all. This would be true of all or almost all of the behavior of animals. And Pareto, in spite of the prejudice of rationalists, believes it to be true of a surprising percentage of human actions. Taboos and other superstitious acts, which are by no means confined to primitive peoples, are obvious examples, as are many rituals, sports, and courtesies. Human beings simply do things without any purpose at all. It is natural for them to be active, whether or not there is any consciously understood point in the activity. Very common also are cases where the purpose or goal is impossible. The goal may be transcendent, that is, located outside of the real spatio-temporal world of life and history, and in all such cases, it is, from Pareto's scientific standpoint, strictly impossible. So if the goal is heaven or nirvana or the duplication of the cube or any other transcendent dream or illusion. On the other hand, the goal, if not impossible in strict logic, may nevertheless be impossible for all practical purposes, granted the real nature of the world. So if the goal is a Tower of Babel to reach to the highest heaven, or a utopia of eternal peace and universal goodwill, or some fantastic personal goal, as when a dreamer with no aptitude decides to become the greatest violinist in the world, or a child just learning numbers to count to 1 billion, in all these cases, conduct motivated by such goals or purposes is non-logical. Pareto is strict with his definition. It might be that, though the deliberately held purpose is impossible, yet the activities carried out would yield such a result that the person in question would judge desirable if he stopped to think about it. Striving for utopia, a worker might get a 10% raise in standard of living. This result, doubtless, the worker might judge desirable so far as it went. Even in this case, however, the worker's conduct is non-logical because it is not and could not be the logical consequence of the conscious purpose. The desirable result follows as a chance byproduct, and the goal held in mind is logically irrelevant to it. We have here the situation which I analyzed, Burnham says, in discussing Dante. Where there is a disparity between the formal goal and the real goal of an action, then the action is non-logical. In logical action, the formal goal and the real goal are identical. Finally, action is non-logical when the means taken to reach the goal are in fact inappropriate to that purpose. If the carpenter tried to pound his nails with a sponge, then his means would be inappropriate, no matter how suitable he might himself think them. So too, if a surgeon used a pickaxe for an appendectomy, or if an oppressed people thought they could overcome a despotic social regime by an assassination or two, or if a democratic electorate believed that by voting a change of parties in power, they might be guaranteed an era of endless prosperity. Everyone knows that a certain amount of human conduct is non-logical. Pareto stresses on the enormous scope of the non-logical. His book lists many thousands of examples, and each of these could suggest 1,000 more of the same kind. Other writers on the nature of society have recognized the existence of non-logical conduct. Some have even admitted that quantitatively it exceeds the logical. But almost all we have in the end held that somehow the margin of logical conduct is what is most distinctively human and what is decisive for the development of government and society. Pareto not only shows that non-logical conduct is predominant, his crucial point is that the conduct which has a bearing on social and political structure, which he calls the social equilibrium, is above all the arena of the non-logical. What happens to society, whether it progresses or decays, is free or despotic, happy or miserable, poor or prosperous, is only to the slightest degree influenced by the deliberate rational purposes held by human beings. Taboos, magic, superstition, personified abstractions, myths, gods, empty verbalisms, in every culture and at every period of history express man's persisting non-logical impulses. The forms change, but the fundamentals remain. Gods and goddesses like Athena or Janus or Ammon are replaced by new divinities such as progress and humanity and even science. Hymns to Jupiter give way to invocations to the people. The magic of votes and electoral manipulation supersedes the magic of dolls and wands. Faith in the historical process does duty for faith in the God of our fathers. It is impossible to review here the massive evidence. Let us rather concentrate attention on certain types of human activity which are significantly related to political and social change and discover whether these are logical or non-logical. And I will return to Pareto and this subject tomorrow. So, Yakorai Paulo says these days you can get preferential treatment for your kids if they're diagnosed with ADHD, Asperger, etc. So there's an industry to sell watered-down psychiatric diagnoses to upper middle-class parents. When ADHD, or ADD, as it was first called, when this was first rolled out in the 1990s, a reporter colleague of mine was writing a story about this. And, okay, here's the conditions. If you have these conditions or a significant number of them, then you'd be classified as ADD. And I read the list and I thought I could be classified as ADD under that list, as well as probably, 80% of all children or more. The list was so vast and so various as to be clearly useless. That is to say, it was a checklist for parents with troublesome children, or perhaps they weren't particularly troublesome. Just the parents couldn't be arsed to exercise any discipline. Oh, my child is A, B, C, D. I want the Ritalin. Hickman Warrior says AFD isn't that far right at all. Well, yes. No, I've never thought so. Adam says Billie Eilish is poster child and role model for Zoomer neural divergence. Every eccentricity diagnosed, medicated, and validated. Billie Eilish has a shocking lack of affect. She appears to be hopped up on Goofenthal constantly or continuously, as Hank Hill would say. And she is the troubadour of Generation Z. Is she not? Chocokin666 says Antifa recently suppressed an AFD member with a baseball bat. Yes, I remember reading about that. Never give your grandkids drugs, says Quachalango. No, I just think this is an exceedingly bad habit, just like the habits of therapy in childhood, because therapy seeks to direct explanations to make them extrinsic. Oh, this is the reason why you're feeling this way. This is the reason you're acting in this way. Forces beyond your control. And, with drugs, you get kids started on drugs. Hey, Kurt Cobain was on Ritalin. Look how he turned out. Now, that's one example, but given time, I could cite many, many, many such examples. You get kids used to these kinds of mind-altering drugs at an early age, and they come to see all their difficulties as best addressed by the use of further mind-altering drugs. Rilla Crack says, can't have youths making up their own movements, have to be astroturfed. What, old boy? PhD in the old DDR hates the AFD, says Chocokin666. Infanitol, the drug of the masses, want to be spoon-fed their ideas and desires. Goofenthal, actually, that's from King of the Hill. It's not my coinage. Ritalin, says William Hicks. Well, Ritalin is a very popular drug in the entertainment industry, and it's used, for weight loss. That it's become a cliche, a meme even. that such and such a celebrity, quite possibly a Kardashian, claims to have lost a significant amount of weight through changes in diet and exercise. And everyone says, yeah, maybe, but the Ritalin cocaine didn't hurt. You know how Ritalin is supposed to work? Ritalin is an amphetamine. So you think you have kids which are supposedly overactive and you give them an amphetamine. Well, that doesn't make sense. Ritalin supposedly overheats children's brains so they shut down. Does that sound like a kind or wise thing to do to children? I was first alerted to the ADD, now ADHD phenomenon by a report on 60 Minutes some decades ago. And they showed this family who they had a boy, and it's always a boy. Well, it was back then. And he was considered to be troublesome. So he was put on Ritalin. And they interviewed the boy, and he spoke like this, and I'm not exaggerating. He spoke like this. I'm glad I'm on Ritalin because I used to cause a lot of trouble. Now I don't cause trouble anymore. I saw this and I thought, oh, we're turning boys into zombies now. How about if you let them run around on the playground? Kick a ball around, throw a ball around, hit a ball with a bat, whatever. Just make up games, tags. Children used to do this. And there wasn't this terrible problem with the overactive boys. Boys are supposed to be active. Quachalango says, I'm the best violist without talent in the world. I recall Ritalin being prescribed to Linda Blair's character in The Exorcist, says Anne Run. Okay, and we're going to talk about Joe Biden now. Joe Biden versus the governors. This is from the Daily Mail. President Joe Biden has urged Americans to act aggressively against COVID-19 as the Republican governors of Texas and Mississippi lifted all their restrictions to fully reopen and other states started relaxing rules. His plea came as restrictions and mask mandates were dropped in Texas and Mississippi, with all businesses able to reopen at full capacity within a matter of days. Was this the first good news on this front in a year? I think it is. The two southern states join a rapidly growing movement by governors and other leaders across the U.S. to loosen COVID-19 restrictions, despite pleas from health officials. Despite the push, Biden on Tuesday asked Americans to remain vigilant and continue wearing masks as the COVID-19 vaccine effort continued across the country and new cases declined nationwide. There is light at the end of the tunnel, but we cannot let our guard down now to ensure victory is inevitable. We can't assume that. We must remain vigilant, act fast and aggressively, and look out for one another, he said. Now is not the time to let up. I've asked the country to wear masks for my first 100 days in office. Now is not the time to let our guard down. People's lives are at stake. 100 days and then what? If Biden had said something like, I want you all to wear masks for 100 days and then we're not doing masks anymore, I think that would have been a lot different. But we've been told, no, a little bit long. We've been told this, from last March? Flatten the curve a little bit longer, a little bit longer. It sounds crazy now, but there was talk from Trump and others that, maybe things could be opened up by Easter Sunday. How about that? Such innocent days. The Daily Mail continues, most of the country has lived under mask mandates during the pandemic, with at least 37 states requiring face coverings to some degree. Those orders, however, are increasingly falling by the wayside. North Dakota, Montana, and Iowa have also lifted mask orders in recent weeks. Among the other states gradually reopening are Michigan and Louisiana, with the easing of restrictions on bars, restaurants, and other businesses. Massachusetts has lifted all restaurant capacity limits. South Carolina erased limits on gatherings, and North Carolina allowed people back inside bars for the first time. Chicago and Las Vegas's public schools also welcome back students this week, and California has now reached an agreement that aims to get most children back in classrooms by the end of March. There's a word for this, and that word is sanity. But wait, as the easing of restrictions continues to varying degrees across the country, a number of public health officials and medical experts were critical of the decision to drop all restrictions in some states, particularly mask mandates. Dr. Ashish Jha, once again, not a Westerner, and it's only in the West where we care about liberty. That's not really a concern anywhere else in the world. Anyway, this fellow, Dr. Jha, Dean of Brown University School of Public Health, said he was disappointed by Texas and Mississippi's decision because the U.S. was close to having all high-risk people vaccinated, except for those people who don't want to be vaccinated. We're so close to the finish line here in terms of vaccinating high-risk people, he told ABC's Good Morning America. Andy Slavitt, a White House COVID-19 senior advisor, told CNN that they understood the pressures governors were facing, but urged them to rethink lifting mask mandates. We think it's a mistake to lift these mandates too early. Masks are saving a lot of lives, he said. I'd like to see the empirical evidence on that. I'm really hoping that the businesses and the community and people in Texas, the mayors and the counties will rethink this. I hope the governor rethinks this. Hopefully states will stick with this until such a time as we get through all the vaccinations and see the other side of this. CDC Director Dr. Rochelle Walensky said we stand to completely lose the hard-earned ground we have gained. Yes, another military metaphor. U.S. cases have plunged more than 70% over the past 2 months from an average of nearly 250,000 new infections a day, while average deaths per day have plummeted about 40% since mid-January. Kind of correlating to the end of cold and flu season, one might say, but I'm sure that's merely coincidence. Biden said Tuesday that the U.S. is now on track to vaccinate all adults by the end of May after he invoked the Defense Production Act to speed up the manufacturing of Johnson & Johnson's newly approved one-dose shot. And I'm going to have more to say about that one-dose shot shortly. And now we're going to talk about, the reaction. The reaction from Hollywood to Texas. What do you think that Hollywood thinks of Texas? Anyway, George Takei, a famous homosexual, a famous octogenarian homosexual, says, make no mistake, Texas and Mississippi opening back up to 100% will disproportionately impact and kill minorities who comprise much of the essential workforce bearing the brunt of this pandemic. This is criminal, a racist death sentence for so many who could have been spared. Given that we know that it is Black people in the United States who are most loath to wear masks and also to observe social distancing, they are also most loath to get vaccinated. I'm going to guess that the Blacks in Texas and Mississippi are quite pleased by going back to normal. Billy Eichner, that vile person, says, also, Texas no longer allows voting, and we are rebranding San Antonio as Whoville. Is that supposed to be a joke? Is that even an attempt at a joke? Rosanna Arquette, Putin sure has a cozy relationship with President Lopez Obrador of Mexico. It's also close to maskless Texas. Oh no, the insanity is creeping over the border from Mexico. Chelsea Handler, I can never get enough of her advice. Only another white man could figure out a way to become a worse person than Ted Cruz. White man. Boo! Michael McKean, an actor who I've admired for decades. Why do they do this? Governor Abbott actively canceling Texans. How about Governor Cuomo, who was actually actively canceling New Yorkers? Maybe it's 15,000 of them. Mike Birbiglia, oh yes, another so-called comedian, Biden, let's vaccinate everybody. Texas governor, let's kill everybody. Let's see. Here's a joke from Mike Birbilia. When Dr. Seuss died in 1991, the minimum wage was $4.25 an hour. Currently, it's $7.25. I feel like it's the Dr. Seuss story we should be talking about. Oh, the places minimum wage won't take you when there's stagnating wage growth. Please clap. Bradley Whitford says the GOP is a death cult. Yeah, okay. Gavin Newsom says absolutely reckless. You know what's absolutely reckless, Governor Newsom? Going to a restaurant called the French Laundry with a dozen of your pals and being photographed there, not wearing masks, not observing social distancing, and chowing down on $800 a plate meals, or you were telling everyone that they are going to be perhaps arrested if they even leave their homes. That's what I call absolutely reckless. Oh, and Jordan Davidson has conveniently provided a picture of Newsom and his Tony friends at the French Laundry restaurant. Going back to the theme of mental health, this is from Yaron Steinbuch at the New York Post. The COVID-19 pandemic has taken a profound mental health toll on teens and young adults, with self-harm and overdose claims skyrocketing, particularly among 13 to 18-year-olds, according to a troubling new national study of medical records and insurance claims. Fair Health, a nonprofit that collects data for the largest database of privately billed health insurance claims in the U.S., looked at 32 billion records and studied those in the 13 to 18 and 19 to 22 age ranges. The organization tracked month-by-month changes from January to November 2020 compared to the same period from the year before. In March and April 2020, total mental health claims for youngsters ages 13 to 18, as a percentage of all medical claim lines, approximately doubled compared to the 2 months in 2019. Claims for overdoses, specifically in that age group, jumped to 95% of all medical claims in March 2020 and 119% in April 2020 compared to the same period a year before. Claim lines for substance abuse disorders also spiked as a percentage of all claims in March, 65%, and April, 63% in 2020 compared to their corresponding months in 2019. Also, in the 13 to 18 age groups in April 2020, major depressive disorder claim lines increased 84%, and generalized anxiety disorder claim lines rose 94%. In general, the 19 to 22 group had mental health trends similar to, but less pronounced than the younger set. Fair Health President Robin Gelbert said the COVID-19 pandemic has had a profound effect on mental health, particularly on that of young people. The findings in our new report have implications for all those responsible for the care of young people, including providers, parents, educators, policymakers, and payers. Those seeking help with mental health rose during that time, despite other medical claims declining. Gelbert noted, we clearly see a reduction in people accessing medical care, particularly in March and April, but we see a continued utilization of mental health services during that period. Oh, her team also found that gender disparities in mental health services that existed before the pandemic were widened. While girls accounted for 2/3 of claim lines before the outbreak, the percentage of claims attributed to females jumped from March on, reaching 71% in November 2020. These results are generally consistent with other researchers' findings of mental illness. Okay, and the Biden administration. According to the New York Post, Stephen Nelson, a majority of Americans disapprove of President Biden's executive orders on immigration and transgender athletes participating in women's sports. The poll, conducted in late February by Harvard University and Harris Insights, found 55% disapprove of Biden's executive order to require schools to let biological boys who identify as girls to participate in girls' sports and vice versa. Also lagging with 55% disapproval was Biden's decision to reduce the deportation of those here illegally who have committed crimes such as DUIs that are not national security related. Biden's decision to kill the Keystone XL oil pipeline from Canada, criticized for eliminating thousands of jobs, actually tens of thousands, at 53% disapproval. Yeah. And, oh yes, America is back. This is the tagline of Biden foreign policy. This is from Christopher Roach in American Greatness, bragging about his restoration of the pre-Trump neoliberal foreign policy. Joe Biden proudly declared America is back. What this means in practice is that barely a month into Biden's term, America is back to bombing Syria for alleged provocations by Iranian-backed militias. While ordinary Americans on both left and right are wary of dreams of empire and want to focus instead on pressing domestic challenges, Biden's paeans to America's pre-Trump foreign policy, including its disastrous run in the Middle East, suggests someone unwilling and unable to learn from events. For example, this recent attack supposedly was a response to an Iranian-backed militia, but this prompts the question, why are American troops still in Syria and Iraq? On what authority and for what purpose does this mission continue? Biden's recent approval of a limited bombing did almost nothing to justify the decision to the American people, nor did he attempt to justify the continued presence of U.S. troops in a danger zone. Instead, the White House sent a pro forma statement to Congress, and that's about it. The United States has been involved in Syria since 2011. First, America set out under Barack Obama to remove Bashar al-Assad by arming the so-called Free Syrian Army. Then, having armed the anti-Assad rebels, many of them became unmanageable and joined ISIS, wreaking havoc in Syria, in Europe, and here at home. President Trump then proceeded to devise policies to destroy ISIS, which the military largely achieved. But now what? Does Biden still mean to remove Assad? And if so, why are we so sure that what comes next won't resemble ISIS? Trump faced a lot of criticism for ordering our troops out of Syria after the ISIS mission was complete. He was then persuaded into keeping some forces there, ostensibly to guard both critical oil resources and America's Kurdish allies. Key government officials, including a Syrian envoy, lied to him about the numbers and status of American forces. I should point out that the moderates, the so-called moderates that America, as well as Canada and Britain, backed in Syria, they're Al-Qaeda. They changed their name, but they're Al-Qaeda. Hey, remember Al-Qaeda? Remember 2001? Roche continues, America has been in the Middle East since the late 1970s and has little to show for it. Our involvement seems to make things worse abroad while increasing our risk at home. Barack Obama, who ran as peace candidate, withdrew from Iraq only to get us involved in Libya and Syria during his second term. These were both sold as humanitarian missions, but the end results were quite inhumane. As Andrew Basevich observed, the confused state of U.S. policy towards Syria, the yawning gap between high-sounding words and half-hearted action, testified to the larger disarray now enveloping Washington's approach to the greater Middle East. After Libya, not to mention Iraq and Afghanistan, it was impossible to sustain the illusion that eliminating this or that unsavory regime held the key to putting the region back together again. Well, remember my iron law of American foreign policy, that in any dispute between Muslims, well, particularly Sunni Muslims, and Christians, or Sunni Muslims and a government which tolerates Christians, such as Syria, or Sunni Muslims and Buddhists, the United States government is going to line up behind the Sunni Muslims. Perhaps it has something to do with anti-colonialism. I can't come up with any other reason. I mean, sheer perversity, evil, perhaps. Let's talk briefly about the revelations, or the lack of them, about what transpired in Washington, D.C. on January the 6th. This is Jim Hoft from the Gateway Pundit. As reported back in mid-January, Speaker Nancy Pelosi and GOP leader Mitch McConnell refused National Guard support before the announced protests on January 6th. This was well documented and explains why Democrats closed their bogus impeachment case against President Trump rather than allow the truth to shine down on the American public. who would learn that it was Nancy Pelosi who failed to secure the U.S. Capitol in January, not President Trump. In a Washington Post interview with the Washington, D.C. police chief, Steve Sund, the National Pulse reported the outgoing police chief believes his efforts to secure the premises were undermined by a lack of concern from House and Senate security officials who answered directly to Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Senate Leader Mitch McConnell. Yeah, that's interesting. John Falcicchio, chief of staff for D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser, admitted literally this guy is on the phone. I mean, crying out for help. It's burned in my memories. That is Capitol Police Chief Steve Sund on the phone begging for help. Wonder why that happened. I wonder why Capitol was not secured. Strange. This is from Christina Lila at the Gateway Pundit. It turns out the armed insurrection of the Capitol building on January 6th didn't involve any firearms. The Democrats, their dishonest big media and big tech and their fact checkers claim the intrusion into the Capitol January 6th was an armed insurrection. Senator Ron Johnson Wednesday asked top FBI counterterrorism official Jill Sanborn if law enforcement confiscated any firearms on January 6th during a Senate committee hearing on the Capitol riot. Sanborn said that no firearms were confiscated at the so-called insurrection. Direct question. How many firearms were confiscated in the Capitol or in Capitol grounds that day? Answer from Sanford, to my knowledge, we have not recovered any on that day from any other arrests at the scene at this point. Senator Johnson pressed for more information regarding firearms. Nobody has been charged with an actual firearm weapon in the Capitol or on Capitol grounds. Sanford replied, correct. How many shots were fired? Johnson asked. I believe the only shots fired were the ones that resulted in the death of the one lady. That would be Ashley Babbitt. Big story, one might think. Big story. And here's a mysterious death, another mysterious death. This is from Tristan Justice at the Federalist. FBI Director Christopher Wray refused to disclose details surrounding Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick's January death before lawmakers Tuesday. Media speculation about his death on the day after the Capitol riot fueled Democratic conspiracies perpetuated by legacy outlets. This was primarily from a New York Times report, which initially said Sicknick was killed by a blunt blow from a fire extinguisher. There's an ongoing investigation into his death, Wray explained. I have to be careful at this stage because it's ongoing, not to get out in front of it. How long does it take? Senator Grassley asked, so does that mean that since the investigation's going on, you have not determined the exact cause of the death? Wray said, that means we can't yet disclose cause of death at this stage. But have you determined the cause of death? Grassley pushed. I didn't say that. We're not at a point where we can disclose or confirm the cause of death, Wray clarified. Why so reticent? The FBI director's denial of any new details surrounding Sicknick's death is likely to fuel new conspiracies over the officer's passing, which was politicized by Democrats in pursuit of impeachment against now former President Donald Trump. The false narrative that Sicknick was killed by a fatal hit from a fire extinguisher amid the chaos first emerged from a piece in the New York Times published January 8th, headlined, Capitol Police Officer Dies from Injuries in Pro-Trump Rampage. Quote, pro-Trump supporters overpowered Sicknick, 42, and struck him in the head with a fire extinguisher, according to two law enforcement officials, unquote. The paper later quietly corrected its reporting with an update pinned to the top of the page as the Democrats' impeachment proceedings wrapped up, weeks after subsequent reporting had already debunked its original claims that Sicknick's death came as a consequence of a fire extinguisher. House Democrats, however, cited the Times' unproven theory in their impeachment pretrial memo. Officer Sicknick's mother, Gladys, threw more cold water on the fire extinguisher conspiracy last week, telling the Daily Mail that they so far believe her son might have suffered a stroke. She said, he wasn't hit on the head, no. We think he had a stroke, but we don't know anything for sure. We'd love to know what happened. You know, isn't it funny that do we have an official cause of death for George Floyd yet? I don't think we do. And I think that it's significant that we don't have this official cause of death. How many, what's it been, like 9 months? Something like that, 9 or 10 months? Oh, interesting piece from the New York Times by Jane Coaston, who was the host of the Opinions podcast, The Argument. And she says something she talks about conservatism. She seems to understand more about the failure of the conservative movement than most of the media, certainly the conservative movement. She writes, believe it or not, the Republican Party is ideally positioned for at least the next 2 years. As the opposition party, it will not be expected to offer solutions to the country's myriad problems, much less introduce substantive legislation. It will not be expected to do anything except what it does best, oppose the Democratic administration and the Democratic Party. But the spirit of opposition that much of the Republican Party feels so at home inhabiting exposes the Achilles heel of movement conservatism, the weakness that stands to doom the party's efforts to move on from Donald Trump. While many who proudly call themselves conservatives agree about what conservatism is not, there is no such consensus on what conservatism is. Oh, I think I can give you a consensus. I'll get back to that. Because of this, even when holding power, movement conservatism is fundamentally an opposition movement. This impulse served it well when it stood in opposition to President Barack Obama and correspondingly to everything he seemingly represented. But Donald Trump's candidacy exploited conservatism's glaring lack of a central motivating force. Unlike the 16 candidates he faced during the Republican primary, Trump grasped the simple idea that many things voters, even in a Republican primary, want may not align with conservative bromides about personal responsibility and limited government. Fiscally conservative conservatism may hold the idea of government-provided health care or payments aimed at family formation at arm's length for fear of enabling dependency, but many voters don't. The conservatism that was seemingly agreed upon by the Heritage Foundation and the American Enterprise Institute and National Review was not the conservatism that Trump sold to the American people. Mitt Romney campaigned in 2012 on being severely conservative. This sounds like a medical diagnosis, doesn't it? And lost. Trump campaigned on a self-serving redefinition of what it means to be a conservative and won. After all, as Trump told ABC News in 2016, this is called the Republican Party. It's not called the Conservative Party. Yes, again and again and again, can't be repeated often enough, Donald Trump did not run as a conservative. What Trump was for and what his voters supported was not the populist nationalism generally associated with Trumpism. Populist nationalism has a long history in this country. Paleoconservatives like Pat Buchanan, the former Nixon assistant and political commentator, have espoused a blend of America First isolationist foreign policy rhetoric and distrust of perceived culture and political elites for decades. While populist nationalism exists, its existence does not depend on any one individual. Trumpism does. In reality, there is no such thing as Trumpism. Well, we'll see about that. What does Conservatism Inc. stand for? The rich gets richer. Any parts of the world that the United States doesn't control, it must control. And number 3, Israel, Israel, Israel. That's it. They may come up with policy papers. They may write books, going on about choice. Yes, you have the choice to have your jobs shipped to Asia. Yes, you have the choice to get addicted to OxyContin or oxycodone. That's how it works out in practice. You have the choice to get an Xbox and not a child. But it's good to see that even the New York Times recognizes that conservatism is a dead letter. I wish people would just stop using that word. Davidson writes in The Federalist, teachers' unions want to stay home forever, and Democrats' COVID bill, E-rate expansion, would help them do it at your expense. Beginning on page 210 of the massive COVID spending bill, Democrats included a provision to grant more funding for a scandal-filled, already bureaucratically resourced program called E-Rate. In its current state, E-Rate gives schools a discount on telecommunications services to better serve their classrooms. Whatever did schools do without telecommunications services? The latest legislation, however, expands E-Rate to provide funding and resources to schools, incentivizing virtual learning as a majority of students around the nation approach nearly a year or so of limited in-person learning. In addition to allocating billions of dollars more to a program and state education agencies that only used approximately $3 billion of the previously designated $68 billion, E-Rate also has a bumpy track record in terms of rollout. Yes, the eternal goal of teachers, to have 12 months off a year and still get paid. Needless to say, Dr. Jill Biden is on board. From the Daily Mail. Dr. Biden met with students who have returned to the classroom and listened to how teachers safely return to in-person instruction during a visit to schools in Connecticut and Pennsylvania Wednesday. Her trip, made with newly confirmed Education Secretary Miguel Cardona, was made to highlight how schools have safely transitioned from virtual learning. It comes as President Biden is pushing for schools to resume 5-day in-person classes by May, a goal the administration is struggling to meet. Isn't this going to cost hundreds of billions of dollars, supposedly? Miguel said that vaccinating teachers is his top priority as head of the Department of Education. The president Tuesday pushed for teachers to be prioritized when it comes to getting the COVID vaccine, but said it wasn't necessary for schools to reopen, an area of tension between him and the unions which backed his candidacy for president. So, tension there. And more on this subject. Oh, yes. Baseball is starting soon. We'll see how many fans are left after last year's fiasco. Will fans be allowed to go to the stadium? Well, not in Chicago. Maybe sometime. This is from CBS Chicago. Opening day for Major League Baseball is less than a month away, but don't expect to see fans in the stands at Chicago Cubs or White Sox home games when the regular season starts. Lesbian Goblin Mayor Lori Lightfoot, I added the first two words, said Tuesday afternoon that officials are not ready yet to allow fans inside sports stadiums just yet. Not yet ready to allow fans inside sports stadiums just yet. You only need one use of that yet there, but here we have two, because none of these stories are edited anymore. Even though the city has seen significant improvement in key COVID-19 metrics, but she said she expects that to happen at some point this year. Always the bait and switch. Always the bait and switch. I promised I'd have more to say about the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. This is from the Charlotte Observer. The Archdiocese of New Orleans has advised Catholics against receiving the new Johnson & Johnson coronavirus vaccine, calling the one-dose shot morally compromised. In a statement Friday, the religious organization said the new vaccine should be avoided due to its link to an abortion-derived cell line used in the vaccine's development and production phases. But the available vaccines from Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna are morally acceptable, the Archdiocese wrote, because only some lab testing utilized stem cells from aborted fetuses, making their connection to abortion extremely remote. Quote, we maintain that decision to receive the COVID-19 vaccine remains one of individual conscience and consultation with one's healthcare provider. In doing so, we advise that if the Moderna or Pfizer vaccine is available, Catholics should choose to receive either of those vaccines rather than to receive the new Johnson & Johnson vaccine because of its extensive use of abortion-derived cell lines. And another story on that topic from the Daily Mail. Yes, Roman Catholic leaders in St. Louis and New Orleans are advising Catholics that the COVID-19 vaccine from Johnson & Johnson is morally compromised. The Archdiocese of St. Louis on Tuesday encouraged Catholics to seek out the Pfizer or Moderna vaccines and avoid the Johnson & Johnson version if possible. And, oh, yes, I am not telling anyone not to get vaccinated. Someone who is, though, is Minister Louis Farrakhan, who has a large following in the American Black community. And, you know, this leads to a problem, which I've mentioned previously, that if the authorities are scolding people for not being vaccinated, and it turns out that Black people are the largest cohort of people who are not being vaccinated, then don't Black people have the right to decide? Must they accede to the same norms as white people? This is from Chuck Ross at the Daily Caller. Louis Farrakhan, the influential leader of the Nation of Islam, continued his crusade against the coronavirus vaccines over the weekend, calling the vaccine a, I'm not going to repeat that, he makes a very grand and dire claim about it. Videos of the convention, which was held for the Nation of Islam's annual Savior's Day, are posted on the group's Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube pages, despite the social media company's policies against vaccine-related misinformation. So why are they removing my videos and not his? Not that I think that they should remove his videos. Not at all. Oh, yes. Some whimsicality from Canada. From Shannon Proudfoot. Good job, Bruce, the guy behind North America's top public health Twitter account. Was that a contest before? Actually, his name is Kevin, and he and his team at Ottawa Public Health have been a rare source of sincere, useful, and sometimes funny information through the pandemic. On February 7th, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers defeated the Kansas City Chiefs to win the Super Bowl. Shortly after the celebratory confetti fluttered across the field at Raymond James Stadium in Tampa, an obscure municipal government Twitter account from a far-off icebound city, the town, some say, that fun forgot, tweeted the following. What an amazing Super Bowl. Congratulations to the Bruce. Make sure to put the winning team's name here. Thanks to everyone who stayed home and watched the game with members of the household. We know this wasn't the usual way to enjoy the game. We thank you for your efforts. And there's a picture, and it says, insert winning team logo here. The tweet went instantly and enduringly viral, eventually seen by some 2.8 million people. There were replies smugly dunking on that idiot Bruce, who was about to get canned from the incompetent drone factory that employed him. Yeah, they couldn't see that coming. And then there was everyone who knew exactly what was going on. To the rest of you, we said, welcome to Ottawa Public Health Twitter. So nice of you to join us. OPH to their friends, the organization has owned the best public health communications game in Canada over this difficult and dismal pandemic year. Did Shannon Proudfoot spend hours examining, the public health response, the social media response from all of Canada's major cities? I'm going to step out on a limb and guess that she did not. In a public health emergency, when you need each person to make the right choices, or everyone ends up in serious trouble. It's not true. Yes, some people can make bad choices in a public health emergency, and not everyone is going to end up in serious trouble. If one person doesn't wear a mask, we're all going to suffer. Good communication is arguably as important to slowing a galloping virus as masks and hand sanitizer. Citizens need information they can understand, trust, and act on. And they need a reason to upend their lives and pull together even when they are tired and scared and stressed. Instead, too many Canadians have been subjected to public health officials who speak like ATMs come to life. Politicians who preach sacrifice while throwing themselves at the nearest jet bound for a beach. And to muddled, condescending, or emotionally constipated messaging about what they need to do and why. But in the midst of that, Morris, is this a PR release from Ottawa Public Health? Because this is what it reads like, not like a news story. Ottawa Public Health is stalwartly putting out long, nuanced threads that explain the reasoning for public health measures people are finding it tough to live with. Empathetic acknowledgments that this is all really hard, but we will get through it. Earnest reminders about what we need to do and how it will help, and smart-ass riffs that grab attention before imparting some solid bit of public health information. Yeah, let's have a look at one of those smart-ass riffs. The idea that COVID-19 is a global conspiracy involving every nurse, doctor, hospital, health unit, and government on Earth shows a rather optimistic view towards project management. Oh, okay. That's quite the zinger there. How about sometimes there are grade 7 caliber sex jokes? Okay, let's take a look at one of those. There's a picture of a banana with a condom on it because we just can't get enough of that. How to stay alive while staying home, chapter 68, sex. Do we ever get tired of being treated like children? Ever? Is there no limit to how much we can be infantilized? Apparently not. Oh, and we are not all in this together. We're not all in the same boat. How about that? Not all in the same boat. Here we go. The analogy is that we're weathering the same storm, but in different boats. Yeah, and some of us are in like Russian oligarch super yachts. Well, most of us are in dinghies. I've been hearing this line for months and months and months. And it's just the same variation of we're all in this together. And the Canadian Army, or a Canadian, what do they call it? What do they call themselves? The Canadian Forces. Keep in mind, not Canadian Armed Forces, because that, I don't know, that might be problematic. It might be a micro aggression. Oh, what? Another risque tweet? Oh, Pillsbury wiener wraps. No offense to Pillsbury, but ours are free and probably work significantly better. Yes, free condoms, which has something to do with COVID-19. So the Canadian Armed Forces, yeah, let me get to this here. This is too funny. This is an actual tweet 12 hours ago from the Canadian Forces in the United States of America. I didn't know that was a separate organization. You know the part when you stay away from your neighbor and wash your hands and call your people and write to your people and don't touch other people. And if you're going outside, mask your entire face except your eyes and forehead, obviously. It's still that part. This is an actual tweet from a military organization. But it's a Canadian military, you know? So I responded, you know that part when the Canadian Forces are a joke and then they become even more of a joke and more and more? Still that part. Let's go to Lockdown Skeptics, which is put together today by Will Jones. Despite saying last month that the government's lockdown easing strategy will be driven by data, not dates, it seems for Boris this only goes one way, and there is no question of better than expected data bringing easing forward. Health Secretary Matt Hancock was out yesterday reiterating the government's line and underlining that there would be no faster easing, even for areas with almost no COVID at all. It's just, have they forgotten how politics works? How about this? Yeah, we told you something unpleasant was going to go on for X period of time. But we've got new information, and now that unpleasantness is going to end significantly earlier. Yeah. No. We wouldn't want to do that because, you know, we said in the past that, let's see, Lockdown Skeptic says, This sounds worryingly like a zero COVID approach from the Scottish government. Justifying the strategy, the Scottish government says it is drawing on World Health Organization advice from November 2020. Indeed, it is. A hitherto underappreciated document, this interim guidance, which notably predates the authorization of vaccines, is a zero COVID charter which envisages restrictions continuing until such time as there is no known transmission of SARS-CoV-2 in the preceding 28 days. I guess Auckland, New Zealand is going to have to be locked down forever then. Test and Trace finds almost no COVID in schools. That would be English schools, which is definitely a good news. Lockdown skepticism was never a fringe viewpoint. No, it wasn't, actually. We had, top doctors, professors, Nobel winners, and the like on our side from the very beginning. But the media lied to you and told us that they were just fringe people, crazies. Sir Graham Brady, MP, asked the Health Secretary to publish the government's evidence on transmission risks in the different settings that are affected by lockdown restrictions. The government's answer has now been published and basically admits it currently has no evidence and won't have any until the summer, by which point all restrictions are envisaged to be gone. Yeah, lockdowns work. Show us the evidence. We don't have that. We'll have to get back to you on that. Or maybe we won't. Alison Pearson writes in The Telegraph, our vaccine program is world-beating and COVID-19 cases are plummeting. So why does the Deputy Chief Medical Officer keep sparking fear about new variants of the virus? Oh, it's now the Brazil variant that everyone is all het up about. And yeah, okay. I don't want to talk about Dr. Seuss because I talked about him yesterday. Let's move on to Alex Berenson. And just give me a second here. There we go. And having had a night to think the Texas and Mississippi announcements through, it really is over now. The vaccines will be the excuse. The only questions are how quickly the blue states will follow and how much they will have to bribe teachers to drop their nonsense. And which public health poobah will be the first to see and get in front of the trend? I guess Fauci. His political antennae are unmatched. And he needs a few months off to write his book and get paid for all his hard work. So finally, I want to talk about Noah's Ark, which is in the news. This is from Catholic News Services. In a new book released on Tuesday of Vice and Virtues with Italian writer Marco Pazza, Pope Francis claims a great flood, perhaps due to a rise in temperature and the melting of glaciers, this is what will happen if we continue on the same path. The Bible says that the flood is the result of God's wrath. It is a figure of God's wrath who, according to the Bible, has seen too many bad things and decides to obliterate humanity. The biblical flood, according to experts, is a mythical tale. The flood is a historical tale, archaeologists say, because they found traces of a flood in their excavations. A great flood, perhaps due to a rise in temperature and the melting of the glaciers, is what will happen now if we continue on the same path. I thought the Earth was going to be terraformed as Venus, but maybe simultaneously we'll all drown and we'll all be fried to death. The Pope has warned about climate change in earlier remarks. In his 2015 encyclical Laudato Si, the Pope wrote, quote, the sister, planet Earth, that's how humans call it, now cries out to us because of the harm we have inflicted on her by our irresponsible use and abuse of the goods with which God has endowed her. We have come to see ourselves as her lords and masters. The crown of creation, actually, it says in the book of Genesis. I wonder if the Pope is familiar with that. Entitled to plunder her at will, the violence present in our hearts, wounded by sin, is also reflected in the symptoms of sickness evident in the soil, in the water, in the air, and in all forms of life. That's why the earth herself, burdened and laid waste, is among the most abandoned and maltreated of our poor. She groans in travail. We have forgotten that we ourselves are dust of the earth. Our very bodies are made up of their elements. We breathe her air, and we receive life and refreshment from her waters. A translation of the complete excerpt from the new book as follows: God's wrath is against injustice, against Satan. It is directed against evil, not that which derives from human weakness, but evil of satanic inspiration, the corruption generated by Satan, behind which single men, single women, entire societies go. God's wrath intends to bring justice clean up. The flood is the result of God's wrath, the Bible says. He is a figure of God's wrath who, according to the Bible, has seen too many bad things and decides to erase humanity. I don't think the Pope has had anything to say about gender reassignment surgery, but apparently a very slight increase in the world temperature is evidence of the work of Satan. It seems fairly obvious that Pope Francis, or Anti-Pope Francis, as I prefer to call him, believes only in the New Testament, well, in the Catholic faith itself, in a metaphorical sense. It's just used to drape his social justice ambitions. I think that would be the most charitable way of looking at it. So who was Noah? According to the Catholic Encyclopedia, he was the 9th patriarch of the Sethite line, the grandson of Methuselah and son of Lamech, who with his family was saved from the deluge and thus became the second father of the human race. The name Noah was given to him because of his father's expectation regarding him. The same, said Lamech on naming him, shall comfort us from the works and labors of our hands, or more correctly from, i.e., which come from the earth, which the Lord hath cursed. Most commentators consider Lamech's words as an expression of a hope or as a prophecy that the child would in some way be instrumental in removing the curse pronounced against Adam. Others, rather fancifully, see in them a reference to Noah's future discovery of wine, which cheers the heart of man, whilst others again, with greater probability, take them as expressing merely a natural hope on the part of Lamech that his son would become the support and comfort of his parents and enable them to enjoy rest in peace in their later years. Amid the general corruption which resulted from the marriages of the sons of God with the daughters of men, that is, of the Sethites with the Canaanite women, Noah was a just and perfect man in his generations and walked with God. Hence, when God decreed to destroy men from the face of the earth, he found grace before the Lord. According to the common interpretation of Genesis 6:3, Noah first received divine warning of the impending destruction 120 years before it occurred, and therefore he was 480 years old. He does not seem, however, to have received at this time any details as to the nature of the catastrophe. After he reached the age of 500 years, the 3 sons, Sem, Cham, and Japheth, were born to him. These had grown to manhood and taken wives when Noah was informed of God's intention to destroy men by a flood, and received directions to build an ark in which he and his wife, his sons and their wives, and representatives, male and female, of the various kinds of animals and birds were to be saved. How long before the deluge this revolution was imparted to him, it is impossible to say. It can hardly have been more than 75 years and probably was considerably less. Noah had announced the impending judgment and had exhorted to repentance, but no heed was given to his words. And when the fatal time arrived, no one except Noah's immediate family found refuge in the ark. 7 days before the waters began to cover the earth, Noah was commanded to enter the ark with his wife, his 3 sons, and their wives, and to take with them 7 pairs of all clean and 2 pairs of all clean on animals and birds. It has been objected that even though the most liberal value is allowed for the cubit, the ark would have been too small to lodge at least 2 pairs of every species of animal and bird. But there could be no difficulty if, as is now generally admitted, the deluge was not geographically universal. After leaving the ark, Noah built an altar and, taking of all clean animals and birds, offered holocausts upon it. God accepted the sacrifice and made a covenant with Noah and through him with all mankind, that he would not waste the earth or destroy man by another deluge. The rainbow would for all times be a sign and reminder of this covenant. He further renewed the blessing which he had pronounced on Adam, and confirmed the dominion over animals which he had granted to man. In virtue of this dominion, man may use animals for food, but the flesh may not be eaten with the blood. So yes, the rainbow, you may know that as the gay symbol or alphabet people symbol, but no, this was stolen from us, because the Noah is the symbol. The rainbow is the symbol that God gave to Noah, that to honor him for his piety, that the earth would never be subjected to a great flood again. But now we have anti-Pope Francis saying, yes, unless you follow the latest word from Greta Thunberg or whatever, there could be a great flood. I've heard people comment about the instruction that Pope Francis got when he was studying for the priesthood. And one begins to wonder, he is constantly spreading heresy, the vilest heresy. For instance, the heresy that Jesus Christ was not free from sin. I'm going to quote here from the translation of the Bible by Father Ronald Knox, which he did single-handedly, by the way, from the Vulgate, but consulting many sources in other languages. It's quite moving, actually. And God pronounced his blessing on Noah and his sons. Increase, he said, and multiply and fill the earth. You see the parallel to Adam. All the beasts of the earth and the winged things of the sky and the creeping things of earth are to go in fear and dread of you, and I give you dominion over all the fishes of the sea. This creation that lives and moves is to provide food for you. I make it all over to you by the same title as the herbs that have growth. Only you must not eat the flesh with the blood still in it. The shedder of your own lifeblood shall be held to account for it, whether man or beast. Whoever takes the life of his brother man shall answer for it to me. Man was made in God's image, and whoever sheds a man's blood must shed his own blood in return. Yes, so much for Pope Francis deciding that capital punishment is illicit. And now increase and multiply, occupy and fill the earth. This too God said to Noah and to Noah's sons. Here is a covenant I will observe with you and with your children after you, and with all living creatures, your companions, the birds and the beasts of burden, and the cattle that came out of the ark with you, and the wild beasts besides. Nevermore will the living creation be destroyed by the waters of a flood. Never again a flood to devastate the world. This, God said, shall be the pledge of the promise I am making to you and to all living creatures, your companions eternally. I will set my bow in the clouds to be a pledge of my covenant with creation. When I veil the sky with clouds, in those clouds my bow shall appear, to remind me of my promise to you and to all the life that quickens mortal things. Never shall the waters rise and flood again and destroy all living creatures. There in the clouds my bow shall stand, and as I look upon it, I will remember this eternal covenant, God's covenant with all the life that beats immortal creatures upon earth. Such was the pledge God gave to Noah of his promise to all living things. So let's have a final look at the chat. Quachalongo says, I like the King James Version over the Vulgate. Well, I've been reading some discussions of Bible translations, and of course, it's useful to read the Bible, but certainly not in the sense of saying, oh no, well actually it means this, because I am not a trained theologian and I'm not familiar with the sources. As far as the Vulgate goes, people say, oh well, no, all of the tremendous findings, since that time, since the 4th century, We don't know the sources that St. Jerome had access to. That is my response to that. Okay. And anything else here? Punishment for treason is still death, says de Boreas. That's a miracle. No politician got notified yet. Okay. Can we have Weeping Wednesdays where we mourn the death of Western civilization? I don't know. I think that there's perhaps too much of weeping on this show. As it is, a friend of mine was saying that watching my show and looking at the angriest man on earth, I don't think that I'm all that angry. These are very angry times that we live in. You know, I love to laugh. No, I do. Actually. Enron says anyone who hasn't seen Blow Up should watch it before KMG's review tomorrow. It is a great looking film, but still a little underwhelmed the first time. I'll watch it again tonight. Well, a lot of people have trouble with the surreal ending. Okay, yes, we are talking about Blow Up, which stars David Hemmings and Vanessa Redgrave and the glorious Sarah Miles. And on the book club on Friday, I'm going to be discussing Helen Andrews' book on the boomers. Spoiler alert, she's not in favor. It's quite a good book, though, and I highly recommend it. I will be back on the air Thursday at 4 p.m. Pacific time, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you like the show or any part of it, I'd appreciate it if you click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. If you would like to make a donation to this live stream, which would help me out a great deal, particularly at this particular time. My PayPal account is linked to Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. Once again, Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. If you are in Canada, a donation to my live stream can be made directly via Interac to kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection to ease the burden. Good night.